Welcome viewers and listeners. This conversation was one of my all-time favorites and one of the most spontaneous I've ever done. We touched on subjects ranging from the Wim Hof Method to psychedelic insights, healing and integration from altered states and traumatic experiences, to the state of our humanity and our evolving position in the world. The two guests were Mackenzie Amara and Kiki Bosch. Mackenzie is a writer, a 5 rhythms teacher, Jungian psychoanalyst in training, and is currently pursuing a clinical psychology PhD. Her life's work is to heal psychological wounds. She also runs the psychedelic integration meetup group in Zurich, Switzerland, where I met her. And I find that she has a really fresh outlook, perhaps down to her growing up in a semi-New Age environment, but with a solid academic background in psychology and more recently Jungian psychoanalysis. Kiki is a philosopher with a special interest in science of the senses. She's an ice free diver, meaning that she regularly dives in frozen bodies of water, such as in the Arctic Ocean, and is on a continual quest to push her body and mind beyond the edge to overcome her limitations. I was inspired by Kiki's story when I met her 3 years ago, as she overcame a sexual assault through applying the Wim Hof Method. Her story was particularly moving for me, as I worked in a drug and alcohol rehab clinic several years ago and witnessed the kind of decline that can occur following such an ordeal. Kiki discovered the Wim Hof Method and fully embraced it to not only overcome her trauma, but empower her to then help others. So, without much further ado, we jump straight into the ice bath experience. Enjoy.
In my perception, when you go into an ice bath, yes, the cold is always there, the pain is always there, it's the same sensation, the same feeling. But you can shift your awareness away from that. And you can shift your focus away from experiencing it as pain to experiencing it as a sensation or even state of bliss. And I think when you are in conversation or with your mind somewhere else, then that focus gets taken away and all the body does is like, oh, there's a shock, this is pain, this is danger. And then keeps on in that mode, and then you have to really override that mode, which you can also do with focus, but it's easier to go in with the focus, have the experience and kind of ease into that compared to then overcoming the big stimulation.
Now, there was a lot of talk in the panel discussion about the disconnection we as a species seem to have in modern times, the disconnection with nature. We're so caught up in our heads and the inner narrative that we're not in our bodies, and that manifests as destruction of the environment and a disharmony between human society and natural ecosystems. And there was someone brought up that indigenous tribes, they still maintain that balance and harmony and have incredibly tough ordeals, often coming of age rituals, which for a Westerner to do is absolutely agonizing torture. Yet for them, they carry out these rituals when they're very young, often like 10 years old or early teens. And if I was to do it, I'd probably be in hospital for like a week or two after. How do you think we can go back to achieving that innate sense of oneness and connectedness with nature?
I mean, never back. We can't go back. We can integrate what we know now and move forward. And I would also say that we're not actually disconnected from nature. We're just connected to a different part of our nature. That we're still very much in our human nature. It is very deeply human to abuse and be selfish and to take too much and to discern and separate and scientize and materialize, and like all of this is still very much part of us as a species. It's part of being a mental construct or a creature that contains mental constructs. So I don't think that there's a returning to that needs to happen. There's a moving forward that can happen, and particularly around like the idea of initiation or rites of passage. Like, yes, that's not something that we have in modern times, and as far as I can discern, it's only something that we don't have consciously. Like we're still being initiated. We're just being initiated by sickness. We're being initiated by gang violence. We're being initiated by suicidal thoughts. We're being initiated by tattoos, rave culture, drug culture, like going out all night, staying out all night. Like we're unconsciously yearning for these initiations, and so creating them through that yearning. We're just not doing it on purpose. We're not doing it by choice. And pretty much everybody I know that has been through an ordeal and made it to the other side talks about it in the same way that a tribal person would talk about being initiated into adulthood. Like anybody that's lived through hell knows that they were just initiated into some new phase of themselves. We're just doing it. It's coming from the depths of our unconscious. It's not coming from what is known or chosen.
So it kind of reminds me when I hear you talk about a quote I really like, and it's, you can't be what you can't see. And only few people have vision strong enough to be what they have not seen before, but what they can mentally perceive. And I think when you talk about these tribes, from a very young age, they do see other tribal members getting through these rituals and gaining
mystical powers. That's what you were going to say, right?
What?
Gaining mystical powers.
No, gaining mystical powers. I don't know, I lost my train of thought now. Lost the train. Yeah. So, I think first of all, within these cultures, it's like it was mentioned yesterday in a panel discussion as well. It's, I would say, a normalization of these tougher moments, and it's appreciated by the tribe. It's appreciated by the tribe to see you on this next level. I think you mentioned it, right? And I think that is a very important message. And within our modern day society, it's almost like looked down upon when you are vocally or when you express that you're going through a tough time, and there is like, I would say, less support and less appreciation of going through these rituals, be it culture we have right now or putting yourself through a difficult situation. And yeah, I think indeed moving forward, it's really again appreciating getting out of a comfort zone, daring to go back into nature and challenge yourself in certain ways, and restructure an appreciation for that, and restructure a cultural normality around these type of things.
It strikes me, and this is maybe a bit extreme, but whatever, I'm going here. It strikes me that like something like an ice bath or a 3-day fast, or I mean even psychedelic experiences, that these are death rituals. These are rituals to make you confront the edge of your mortality, your limitation, your physical and mental limitation, and thus surpass it. So some part of you dies in that process. It can be a sliver of you. It doesn't need to be a conscious part, but like these are all little rituals of death, and that's what the initiations are too. Like it's these 13-year-old boys getting incisions on their penises and watching themselves bleed for the first time maybe ever in their life, and being face to face with their humanity in that moment, their absolute mortality. It's loud clanging noises waking you up in the middle of the night, and men in giant masks with feathers coming out of them to rip you out of your bed. It's like, it's confronting so that you realize, fuck, this is limited. This is going to end, and I need to make something of it while I'm here. And these kind of an ice bath or a psychedelic experience, or again, drug addiction, suicidal thinking, gang violence, like trauma. These are all confrontations with something, with your own mortality, with your own limitation, with your own death. That's the initiatory aspect. And I think the only real difference is like when you do something on purpose, you actually are present enough to receive the full experience of it, and all of those layers of the things that are dying, you're present to all of that. You're seeing it pass through you. You're watching as you surrender, as you let go in that ice bath, as your mind stills. You're present for that process versus a trauma or an addiction. You're not fucking present for that. That's the whole point, is that you lose consciousness so quickly, so immediately, that you can't actually walk yourself back from that edge.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very interesting because for me, I would, instead of mortality, say it makes you face your own potential even.
Yeah.
You know, because like before you're scared and you think this is impossible, and then you're literally taken through it and you watch yourself go through an experience that you maybe deemed impossible or were so afraid of facing, and then to be alive and to be living in a totally different way, having made it through, even for example, a few day fast or even a 1 day fast. I face people who are like, I could never fast because like I need my food in the morning. And it's like, okay, but if that's your structure of identity, then yes.
And that's what I'm saying, is that's the part that's dying.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
the part that says, I could never do that.
Yes.
I'm not the kind of person who fill in the blank. Oh no, I have a deep fear of that, and my fear is enough of me that I don't do the next thing. It's that layer is the layer that dies in the beginning stages of whatever the fuck journey we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think that's the most
journey.
That's the most interesting part though, because like so many people are almost more scared of their own potential in that sense than the fear itself. And it's I have this moment a few times, I don't know, a month with patients that like, oh, it's the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of the unknown. That's why I'm not doing this. That's why I'm not changing. And it's like, no, it's not the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of what you think the unknown is going to contain. You're not afraid of the unknown. You're afraid of what happens in the unknown. What are you afraid of happening? Oh, I'm afraid of failing. Oh, I'm afraid of rejection. Oh, I'm afraid that they'll abandon me. I'm afraid that they will. Okay, so that's the fear. It's not actually the fear of the unknown, because the unknown also contains limitless possibility. It contains deep connection. It contains sunsets and rainbows and ice cream and like birthday cakes and relationships and great sex and like beautiful people and travel, and that's also all there. So like, no, we don't fear that part of the unknown. We're fearing the things that we fear, and being very specific about that, I think, is really crucial, especially when we're talking about engaging the outer edges of human potential, like on an ice bath or I even think sometimes when I have people in my classes or something, it's not even that they fear the unknown, but they fear the fact that they haven't faced themselves until that point.
Right.
It's like, I was so long afraid of this, so I hold on to this because otherwise I have to face that I'm actually not afraid of this, and I've been telling myself for the last 40 years that I'm afraid of this.
Right, it's the fear of who am I going to be on the other side when this is gone. When this part of my identity is gone, who am I going to be? I'm going to have to be a new person. I'm going to have to relate to myself differently. I'm going to have to relate to the world differently. And that's really scary. You don't fit in your clothes anymore. Yeah. That is.
That's the scary part.
What happens if you have to let go of those connections, or you have to relocate, or you have to change jobs, or you have to take a huge risk, like leap into a new life?
I think it's very, very scary for people to realize what actually their hidden potential is and what actually makes them truly happy. Because then they have to face that they haven't given that part of themselves enough attention. They haven't put their own happiness or their own well-being or their own health first.
There's the Marianne Williamson quote comes to mind. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Yeah. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Yeah. and I see that so often. People are obsessed with thinking, oh, I'm afraid of abandonment or rejection, or not living a fulfilling life. And it's like, no, you're not. You're actually afraid of what happens if you're successful in your wildest dreams.
Yeah.
That's way scarier.
Yeah.
That's way scarier, because then you're so responsible.
Okay, so the hero's journey. I totally resonate with what you're both talking about. For me personally, I must say, my whole life I seem to, looking back, I seem to try and push my own limits and boundaries, otherwise I get stuck. And then kind of negative thought loops kick in, and kind of stuff that just holds me back and starts to kind of, life loses its zeal a little bit. And then I feel like I know what to do. I know what I got to do now. And I've explored so many different methods to do that, be it like yoga to the point of putting my leg behind my head and holding it as long as I can, the ice bath, psychedelics. But I feel like no one method seems to work for me. I need to mix and try new things constantly. And when I went to India, the last trip a year and a half ago, I went to the Kumbh Mela and I encountered some Agori sadhus, and they really pushed the boundaries to the point where what they do perform rituals in order to break down dualities. So they do rituals on dead bodies, they live in cemeteries, they eat rotting human flesh, they eat feces, etc., etc. And because to them, everything is divine.
Yeah.
So there is no black and white, there is no good and bad. But that is really pushing a bit far, especially from our own cultural standpoints. But what other kind of methods, other than, say, the ice bath and psychedelics, have you explored and benefited from?
I would say that my first exploration, and by far it's really just been two. It's been Advaita, deep Advaita practice, and non-dual teachings, and going really, really, really far on that path, and dream work and Jungian psychology, and by that I mean like the alchemy of the darkness. Yeah. Like really, really engaging shadow and engaging dark and engaging the unknown in myself, and obviously then as it manifested in the world, as a practice, as a like deep conversation with God. Like this suffering is here, this horror is here, this piece of my puzzle, this piece of my history, which so gutted me or so ruined me or is still ruining me. How is this part of my conversation with God? And just taking that to as pure of a level as I can. And of course that did include, I think for me the Advaita practice that broke me in a way that I needed to be broken, and the psychology put me back together in a way that I needed to be put back together.
Totally.
And they're very part and parcel for me, and continue to inform me. But at this point, I don't feel like I'm looking for anything else. Like I feel like, all right, now I get to live. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, for me as well, alchemy, psychology, like the whole, I've been really diving into mysticism and stuff like that, but also into their practices. For me, I think it all shifted after I experienced a near-death experience, and coming back from that was suffering. It was suffering every day, and like realizing I'm contained, and like I didn't know what I came back for. And alchemy and psychology, like it really helped me to navigate and to get to know and understand what this vessel actually is, and how we can live from a conversation with God in our daily life, in interaction with other gods, in interaction with humans, with interaction with nature. For me, that experience led me to different ways of integrating. I first did a fasting retreat, and with a few days of dry fasting, which I never thought was possible, but I could read that so many of these ancient sages, they used fasting as a way to connect to themselves. So I went on this retreat and fasted for a while, and then continued doing so, only drinking liquids for 2 months. And that taught me so much about how we perceive the energy we need, how we perceive what we actually need to survive, but also what are different things in your life that you can get energy from. And I became so hyper aware of what interactions would give me energy and what interactions would take away my energy, because that's kind of like what I was literally living off. And that just helped me to put myself into a whole different conversation with life itself. And then after that I decided to stay in nature for a little while and really connect to what comes up in nature when we're just out in the wild. So that for me was also a very integrating experience of I slept in a cave for about 6 weeks, and one night there was this massive diamond-headed python that was just I was on his path, I was on his path, and I could see him coming, and I could do nothing but just keep laying on my mat and see which way he would go around me, which he obviously did because I don't look like food for him. But it was a direct interaction with nature on a level that I couldn't comprehend before, and I couldn't never have dared to face myself and be like, okay, you're there is nothing you can do in this very moment other than just lay still and watch him go either left or right around you. And for me, that helped so much, putting yourself in perspective and having that conversation on a deeper level with nature, and knowing that you're just there, and this is the situation how it is right now, and this is the only way you can deal with it is breathing through it. So those are some of the practices that I really enjoyed.
I love that you brought up near-death experience, because I had a couple myself. One lasted several hours, and it was terrifying initially, absolutely terrifying. I liken it to a time where I accidentally exploded a banger in my hand, and my whole hand went completely numb, but I had that in my whole body. I mean, you could have stabbed me anywhere and I couldn't have felt it. And I was on a train in India, and I just recovered from dysentery, and I was just clinging on. I felt like I was clinging on to life, and it was real struggle to get every single breath, and I was just fully focused on the next inhalation. And then I started to let go, and it turned into bliss, and I was completely blind, and I just saw this really intense white light, like looking into the sun. And it must have lasted several hours, but I completely let go, and it was beautiful, and I became like, there was no me anymore. I became one with
everything,
all that is, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. And then something brought me back. I felt like there was a consciousness there, and it reminded me who I am, and I need to come back. And slowly my vision came back. It took a while. It was weird. First it was like old school video games, really blocky, and then it came back more and more and more colors, and I felt reborn, and I was fully healed, and it was an incredible experience. And I experienced something almost identical a few months later with 5-MeO-DMT, which is the active compound in bufo. But what happens with me with psychedelic experiences, I find they more remind me of experiences I had before, especially when I was a kid, where I had much higher frequency of like mystical experiences, or whatever you want to call it, altered states, and then they slowly faded. I guess it's like inversely proportional to my social conditioning.
Yes, exactly.
But I've learned they're key for my progress as a human, and key for my evolution and my flourishing and my health, physical and mental. And we've kind of let go of that fundamental process that tribes still uphold, many tribes around the world. And it's great to see like modern methods, like the ice bath, etc., being developed. And even with technology to some extent.
Yes, definitely.
Like virtual reality, it's really interesting to see what...
Neurofeedback, I think, is very interesting too,
Mm-hmm.
Very promising.
Yeah. So technology, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. So if you look back through history, some of the greatest breakthroughs in science have resulted in like the advent of modern medicine with germ theory, and on the flip side we have bioweapons. And with Einstein we have relativity, that gave rise to the atom bomb. And I think it's sad to say, but it's probably more likely that we'll self-destruct as a species before we really go beyond and maybe colonize other planets. What do you think we really need as a species in order to continue flourishing and harmonize with the planet?
I mean, I'm pretty classic Jungian in this sense, you know, like and anything denied in the psyche of an individual or of a culture comes back up with, you know, 3 heads and much bigger teeth, and the rise of materialism and rationality and the decay of religious systems, spiritual systems, traditional systems, earth-based systems. Like the simultaneity of those things meant, as rationality arose in culture, as materialism arose in culture, as the intellectual enlightenment arose, we were subjugating the irrational. We were subjugating the mystical, the feeling, the intuitive, the feminine, the body, the grass. Like all of this stuff got codified and desacralized, and thus pushed into the unconscious. And then the irrational then comes back up with teeth and claws, and it's insane. It's Hitler. It's masses of people behaving irrationally to the extent of complete degradation of the planet. Like this is what happens when there's a separation, when we try and systematize everything and deny a certain aspect of reality, in this case the irrational, which I'm using as a blanket statement for all things mystical, all things inexplicable, all things mysterious, occult. That shit doesn't leave us as people. We still have a deep need for those things. We have a deep longing to be in right relationship with nature and with God and with other people. Those things don't go away just because we stop believing in them. That longing is still there, and it needs to be met somehow. It needs to be fed somehow. And when it's not fed by actual reality, it gets fed by demons. It turns into a demon. And then we get Hitler, then we get the atom bomb. And like technology itself is neutral, right? These things are neutral. They have no goodness and no badness to them. They just are. Our use of them is what makes them what they can be, or turn into. Like, and that is a decidedly human error.
Yeah.
Always.
I think, I mean, we were having a conversation about this morning actually, and I think it's very interesting. I think what the world really needs right now is integrated human beings, you know, people who know their steps of development, who know, okay, you know, when you have this one experience, for example, with a psychedelic on 5-MeO DMT, or even a near-death experience, like, how do you take that image or that idea of, okay, I feel we are all one. How do you take that into reality? How do you live through those values? How can you communicate that in a slightly different way in reality, not just in your mind, not just as a concept, but to really stand beyond all of levels of consciousness? And indeed, then shadow works come up. The experiences that you have as a child that create your whole social identity. Like, how do you redefine your own social identity when you have had a vision of oneness? Because all of a sudden everything crumbles. When you have a realization like that, your whole structure kind of needs to melt down back to this archaic level of awareness, to then be like, okay, now we can build step for step, integrating the whole human experience and all we have perceived and all we are still perceiving into a reality that we can be proud of living. And I think what you said about the tribes is so interesting, because once we realize that we are literally decaying vessels, I think you start to see the beauty of life. Because then you know that you are dying every day a little bit more, no matter if you're actually gonna pass away like next week or in 60 years, you are dying here. And that's all you came here to do. So for me to then see that and be like, okay, the only thing left for me is to literally offer this life to life itself, to whatever is coming out, be that darkness, be that light. And then all of a sudden the darkness becomes something you can have a conversation about, like we had this morning, like talking about aspects of our being, about shadow sides, about integrating these totally wicked ideas that we have of ourselves, of our beings, of our habits, of our thoughts, to dare and face them as a decaying composition.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the first person to say I'm selfish, I'm a narcissist, I'm arrogant, I can be greedy, I cannot give a fuck about other people. Like, call me whatever you will. I know those things are true about myself. I'm not going to put up a fight, because I've met those, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yep. That's me too. I'm also gloriously generous and silly and fun and like great to be around and creative. I can be shy, I can be in my head, I can be paranoid, like full human experience. And of course there's always going to be more and more to integrate, but like the less attached I've become to needing to be a good person, the more I'm allowing for this wholeness through shadow work, through seeing all of this shit that really led to my addiction, that led to my dissociation, that led to most of the trouble that I've had in my adult life, was a result of deep denial and deep resistance to being a certain way. Like that to me is the unity consciousness. That to me is the recognition of oneness. It's not oneness that does only good in the world. It's not oneness that only ever protects and serves, because I don't know what the good thing to do is in the world. Like I'm not that wise. I don't always know what the right thing to do is. I don't always know what the highest good is. I don't even know what my highest good is sometimes.
So yeah, it immediately reminds me of mythology, and what I find so amazing, both within the Bible and any mythological stories, is like they give you these archetypes that, yes, you can connect parts of yourself to the sun god Ra, which is self-creation, and then all of a sudden there are these demons and they're part of the same story. So how do we relate to that? And then finding aspects of those demons inside of ourselves and be like, hey, yeah, like we were talking this morning about shadow cards, for example, that has like, you are a murderer. Like, how do you like find yourself within the word murderer? Because we are all murderers. The moment we voice, we are literally killing somebody's stream of thought. So in that sense, we can all relate to these darker aspects, these demonized mythological creatures. And once we are able to connect to those and find them as a mirror to ourselves, I think then we are starting to create an actual idea of like, okay, what does oneness and what does the feeling of oneness mean, to be able to identify both with the grass, as with the water, as with another human being and ourselves.
I mean, Jung writes a lot about this, that like the self archetype,
Yeah.
with capital S, is like his concept of the totality or the wholeness, the completion of unutterable, totality. But that the self archetype contains both dark and light. So there is an evil self as much as that there is a good self, and that those two things are always in balance. But when one confronts archetypal evil in themselves, like, that's terrifying, obviously. But that confrontation or that recognition, and I've certainly had this experience in medicine of like being exposed to something that seemed to me to be so purely viciously evil, and realizing, oh my God, the choice is to say yes, this too.
Yeah.
Yes, this too. This is part of it. Okay, yes, this too. Like, yeah. I don't know why this is here. I don't know why this is in me. I need to learn how to be in right relationship to this. That's my responsibility now. As a human being, and I say this quite literally, as a human, not as a god, not as the wholeness, not coming from a place of totality, coming from my ego. It is now my responsibility to do something good with that information, to not cause harm. That's my choice as an individual Mackenzie ego. I need to make that choice every day to be responsible. And I think that that's like where kind of ego strength and ego health comes into play, that like these are things that we can consciously choose to engage with and be responsible to, and need to, because otherwise they take us over. Yeah. I mean, you can see somebody when they're caught in a shadow, when they're caught in something, they look possessed, they act possessed, they behave heinously, out of character. That's possession, and that's a result of not having the interior strength to say, no, not this. I'm too responsible to the good. I'm too responsible to the light. Right? This is the fucking Star Wars. Yeah. Like, are you the Empire or the Resistance? Like, it's a choice every day. It's a choice
every moment.
Every moment.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me to hear you talk. For me, I like within that near-death experience, it was almost a mirror to the pure evil of my ego, because I knew before I started like going into the water, which led to the near-death experience, I knew that I was too cold. I knew, I could feel that I wasn't warming up properly anymore, and still I was like, oh, it's mind over matter, I got this, da 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 da. And I stepped in, and like after a few seconds pass out, and like had this whole ordeal. But to integrate that and to have to face the almost most evil part of my ego that was just like, caused me my own death, because I thought I was stronger than what I was feeling inside of my body at that moment. And like, to me, that dance between then, like, okay, so I am this abusive, I am this, how do you call it, neglectful?
Masochistic?
Yeah, something like that. Sadistic. That was like a shadow aspect that I was like, okay, so how am I also projecting that onto other people constantly? How am I navigating that in the world by being who I am? And to then shift and decide to, okay, how can we use that or like create a more positive approach to hold people and hold myself in a better way. And I think that's the duality of the force, and knowing when to shift and when to change.
And I do in my experience, it like the disconnection does feed the human propensity towards evil. Like I often said, and I often say, before I had a deep embodiment practice, before I had a felt sense of my body, I was a sociopath. I could turn empathy on. I could perform empathy. I could perform feelings. I knew it was fake. I knew it was manipulative. I did not feel a goddamn thing. And that's because of my trauma. It's because I left my body when I was 3 years old and I didn't come back. Like, I'm well aware of that. I have compassion for that. But I was a motherfucking sociopath. I didn't cause harm with it. Probably could have. I probably would have killed myself with a drug addiction because of it, which I guess is causing harm. But it was that disconnect for me because of course you can't feel your feelings if you don't feel your body. Those are they're part and parcel. So I didn't feel my body, so I didn't feel feelings. There was nothing there to feel. There was no body. There was no receiving place, conduit. And I think that disconnect happens for a lot of people on pretty minor levels, like maybe not sociopathy levels, maybe not psychopathy levels, but dissociation, absolutely. Lack of empathy, absolutely. Inability to take somebody's perspective, no theory of mind, no metacognition.
Yes.
Like all of this stuff is deeply embodied stuff that allows us to live in the world in a really wise way, a really connected way, an unpsychopathic way.
But I think you touch upon something so, like, it's a gem, because I think so many people are faking it. They're faking being nice, and then we go to this whole Paulo Freire thing of like,
is bullshit.
False generosity. And it's like you can understand that people want to be good because being good is appreciated in the world. And yes, I'm thankful for every person that does something good for the world, but doing it out of fear to face their own self and to then see like it often leads to self-harm, even
I mean, it's the narcissism of altruism. You have to have a small amount of narcissism to think that A, you know what's good for other people. You don't. And B, that your offering will be better than what somebody can do for themselves if they were given the opportunity to do so. Like, mildly narcissistic. You think that you're better than other people and that your help is needed.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't help people, but we do have to start to check these things.
Yeah.
Especially in these conversations where we're all open-hearted, visionary people. We can be a little bit on the edge of what's appropriate as far as help and like goodness.
Yeah.
If it's not coming from a deeply embodied place, I don't trust it. This false generosity it's performative and feels very dissociated to me.
Yeah.
So what's the subject?
False generosity.
False generosity. Can I rewind a little bit and go back to disconnection from emotions? So that really struck a chord because I feel like most of my life I've been somewhat of an insomniac, and certainly when I was younger, I feel like I was mildly autistic. I was so disconnected from my emotions. If someone told me really bad news and they were in tears, I felt nothing, absolutely nothing. And then like 3 days later, I'll wake up in the middle of the night crying, just being full on heart connected with them and their suffering. And I've got better and better as I grew up, but it still happens every now and then. I'm super disconnected emotionally. And I'd like to stress that I am a scientist and I'm also a computer programmer, and when I've been in that mode of thought, very analytical, I'm extremely disconnected from my emotions, and I start to get all weird physical discomforts and pains and chronic weirdness. And I know now from experience
that I need to push myself to find a solution going out of my mind. And ayahuasca has helped a lot recently, but for me it really is a break glass solution. Like once or twice a year, I'll get the calling when I'm really stuck and I cannot find how to overcome whatever it is that's bugging me. And it goes hand in hand with belief. I know it comes to the stage where I just need to completely break down my belief system and rebuild stronger, more vigorous. Because if you look at every living organism, one of the fundamental features is growth, evolution. We need to keep growing, otherwise we're dead. We might have a pulse, but we're zombies.
I mean, when you talk about emotion, like what immediately comes to mind for me is Lisa Feldman Barrett, who wrote this beautiful book, How Emotions Are Made. And one small change in concept for me made so much difference. She says we shouldn't be talking about emotions, we should be talking about emoting. And she created this concept of like, okay, we are emoting in a certain moment. But then I started to see like, okay, when we know that we're emoting in a certain moment, can we then view that moment, view that emotion within the context of the situation, within the context of that current consciousness we have in that moment? And yeah, when you are more in your analytical mind, the context of your emotion regulation or your experiencing or your emoting in that moment is maybe a lot less. But how can you then integrate that within the more, like the fuller picture, so it doesn't influence you as much outside of that? And then I think you can really start playing with these different levels of awareness and within the difference perceived in emotion regulation and emoting within those moments. And especially I think right now we also, within our language, within our communication, within our educational system, we just miss the emotional granularity. We miss the words, we miss to place them in context. Like of course when you say I'm happy, like you can be happy about being outside, you can be happy about totally something else, or you can have totally different experiences and label them as the same, which then creates this whole concept of this is what being happy is. No, happiness or joyous or ecstasy, that is a context which only can be experienced within interaction in the environment. So when we stop seeing the environment as crucial aspect of our emotional regulation, I think we're missing the whole picture, because then you don't understand anymore, why is this person experiencing an emotion? Why am I not feeling the emotion? What is going on here? You miss the context. And even within our memories, I find that when we don't really recreate that construct or that environment around the experience inside of our heads, then it's just like the same loop on repeat, because you don't take into consideration that each moment is different. So yeah, I don't know, to me that's a big aspect of emotional regulation and emotion recognition in ourselves.
I really like this concept of emotional granularity. I think that's a really lovely and subtle practice of noticing the maybe micro changes or micro experiences in your life, and kind of tasting the more subtle tasting notes of these things. But to your point, or to your question around like evolution and growth, there is absolutely no change in a person's life without affect, without emotion. That is the fuel for transformation in any direction, positive or negative. Yeah. But our emotional experience is what gives us the motivation to make something change. Concepts, ideas, stories about who we are, memories about what happened, these things don't have any juice. They're computer programs. They don't contain electricity. It's the emotions that contain the electricity that actually makes the change happen. It actually fuels it, and we hear this in our language. Like there's a reason that our language is so physical when we're talking about emotions. It's the weight of the world on your shoulders. It's a fire in your belly. It's somebody that shoots from the hip. It's somebody that's lighthearted, right? Like this is the vehicle for movement and transformation, and it happens emotionally. I can have a lot of insight, and I'm like you, like I'm a heady ass fucking person. I can go 7 days without feeling a feeling, and I don't think anything's wrong with me. Like it just doesn't occur to me to feel a feeling. And somebody will be like, hey, like you seem a little whatever, and I'm like, oh yeah. Well, I guess actually, fuck, that did piss me off. I didn't notice. Yeah. Like, it just doesn't occur to me. I'm so cerebral. Again, why the embodiment practice is so fucking crucial for me. And sociopathy is probably my kind of number one shadow archetype or whatever. And there's a benefit to that, you know, when I'm with somebody that's in deep grief, it's really awesome to be able to not need to take that on. It's really cool to be able to provide a clean container where that's not mine, and I can just hold space for that. That's really actually quite, especially for the work that I do, that's a really useful thing. But in my life, and I think in the lives of my patients, like it's those moments of emotionality, talking about what my mom did to me, or what my dad said to me, or what happened in school, or what my wife did last week. That's an idea, and it's a memory, and it contains nothing until the moment of how do you feel about that right now? Then the person's present. Then they're like, oh shit, I feel shame. Then we have something to work with. Then there's a moment of now we can transform because we're here together in a feeling. That the story is something that already happened. That doesn't transform anything. It's what you feel about it now that matters. And creates really big change if you can let yourself be honest about it and have the emotional intelligence to be honest with it, which is something that I see a lot also, is that people don't have the language. All they can say is, oh, I feel stressed. It's like, oh, that's not really, that doesn't give me much. Like the distinction between stressed and shame, or stressed and unhappy, or sad and depressed, or like these distinctions take, even that is really hard for people because we've just not been socialized to feel our feelings or talk about our feelings very well.
Yeah, and I think that's why the whole idea of emotional granularity became so important to me. Like even during, for example, COVID, I was looking up, I was writing this chapter on emotion granularity, and I stumbled upon this amazing emotion called ellipsism, which is the feeling that you will never be able to truly know what the future is gonna bring. And within that, like it was kind of categorized in like depressive states of being. And I was like, wow, that gave me so much insight of what was happening during COVID, because all of a sudden all my plans, all my speaking things, everything got canceled, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Am I depressed? I'm depressed. Okay. And then I was like, okay, I think I'm depressed. Like, I don't know what to do. But then when I stumbled upon that word, I was like, no, I'm feeling that. And it was such a shift in like, okay, wow, I have not just a word, but I can understand why in this context I'm feeling that even more. It's always true. We never know what the next day is going to bring, but we still have an idea or a plan that we pretend play that's going to unfold. And when that falls away, we are all of a sudden lost. And if we don't really know how to even navigate these emotions, then we get just stuck on, I feel sad. That's it. And it's so much, there is so much depth to every experience within its own context, and to then remind yourself time and time again, okay, I'm feeling this, but but what's actually the depth behind it? What's
And when you feel it all the way through, it changes. Like that's
Yeah.
it's a river, it's a stream. Like the water moves through you when you let yourself actually feel it all the way through. There is something on the other side of it. And neuroscience and physiological research shows that a genuine emotion lasts 2.5 seconds. It is a flash in the pan. It is a very quick experience. When you give yourself to the purity of it, it's like and
Yeah.
then it's through, and then it's over. But our resistance to it creates this buildup. It's like a dam of just like this huge thing that I never feel. And then, of course, the second that you feel a little bit of sadness, it's all of the sadness that you've never felt in 30 years of your life. It's like, I can't, of course you can't
Yeah.
fucking feel that. That's awful. Nobody wants to feel that sad or angry or whatever. But when the moment occurs, like the more present we can be in the moment of like, oh, that just happened. That's a cathartic moment. It's a moment of transformation, however minuscule, and it's brief.
Yeah.
It's really brief when we can be honest with it, which I think most people again I experience this with my patients a lot. That like the dam breaks and it's just endless tears or endless anxiety.
Yeah.
Or, and that's the thing that people are afraid of, is that I'm going to be stuck in this feeling forever, which is a totally legit fear. But the more present we can be with our emotional experiences as they're happening, and I'm saying this fully not doing it myself, like I'm talking about it because I know that this is what one is supposed to do,
Yeah.
but like I said, I'm mildly
practice.
sociopathic. So but like it's that granularity of like, oh yeah, okay, that did touch me, that does make me sad right now.
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes from now, I'm not still going to be stuck on the sadness. I'm going to be on to the elation
Yeah.
of the dragonfly that just flew by or whatever. Like,
And I find that so beautiful as well about this integral theory of consciousness, because once you reach a certain awareness of your own body and your own mind, they say, okay, your emotions go back to a very basic. And you see that in kids, like they can fight now or they can fall and then they start playing again 5 minutes after. And to be able to experience emotions as an adult in the same way, so this doesn't have to build and then totally crash your whole nervous system into burnout, depression, anxiety, panic attacks. They're all just symptoms of us not being able to actually perceive the world in the way that our bodies and minds like to perceive the world, to be able to express like anger. We were talking about it like only recently. I actually realized, like, in an ayahuasca ceremony, I became so angry at the world. And it was like, it indeed felt like all the anger at once. And my body was trembling and I was like, I'm so angry. I didn't know what to do with the anger. And I just started crying and I was shaking and I was like, whoa. This is how anger feels. And then I was like, okay, now I could actually find how to use that feeling in a again positive way, going back to like, how do you use that force? You can feel the anger and then still be able to have a normal conversation about it and be like, hey, this is something that just happened really upset me, and I probably know it's not your intention, or I probably know that it's very situational based, or you yourself are constantly in fight, flight, freeze modus, which creates tension like always. But by doing that, you can open up the conversation about these feelings. And how I found, like, people actually always meet it with such appreciation. First of all, most of the time they're not really aware of how something that they said or did can truly impact a person. So yeah, I think that's already a root cause. We don't want to be angry. We want to be the good person. We don't want to feel upset or get emotional, and then again comes with all these labels, and like you said already, like we forgot almost the feminine force of that. And I think now in the world today, that's quite a little bit uprising to dare and feel again these waves and these tidal movements of our being in a more pure way.
Tidal is a really important word in that context, because the flip side of this is also true. I see this a lot, that people feel so good in their emoting that they think about things constantly that make them feel more, and it's this like replaying of painful experiences or upsetting conversations or shit that amps them up, and they're in that loop and they're not taking any action. So like the opposite can also be true, that like I'm just gonna feel a lot about this and never move forward, never act, never make the world look different, never be creative with it. That like the beauty of an emotional experience is that you can take that suffering and turn it into art. You can be creative with it. That's the transformation, whether it's the creation of yourself in a moment, whether it's the creation of something material or a relationship or a family or whatever, a new way of being, yada yada. Like it's the creation that emotion fuels. And if you're just stuck in your loop of feeling your feelings, thinking about the angry things, thinking about the sad things, crying all over again, and you're not acting, that's also not very useful. Lovely that you have that emotional intelligence and you have that connection to yourself, but we do need you out in the world acting and making shit based on that. Like that's why it's here. It's a gift to have you make shit for the world.
I think that's like, especially when I now go back, for example, to that conversation that I had with a friend, like in that moment, we created a totally different bond. It's like, okay, now we are able to also express to each other when something really deeply hurts us. And that like opened up this whole new creation of interaction. And art, poetry, like everything is so related to us being able to translate what we are feeling or what we are experiencing in our own unique way. So action is, I would say, the only thing that the world really needs within that emotional.
It's an imperative step. Absolutely.
Emotions are not like, you feel them, they're inside of you, but creation.
So all this talk of emotions, it's got me thinking of what I've often contemplated. What is the point in emotions? Why are humans so emotionally, why are we so emotional? If you look at animals, I mean, most of them don't even have many facial expressions at all. We've got so many more muscles that can do a whole repertoire of different facial expressions to express emotion. And it got me thinking, as you were both talking there, that humans, on the popular theory in psychology of mentalization, which you might be familiar with, we are on, I think it's the 5th level of mentalization. And if you look at like a dog, it only has 2 levels of mentalization, 2 or 3. If you cover a dog's eyes, it doesn't think that other people can see it. It's not aware of that. And humans were able to apprehend other people's thoughts. So I can know that you are thinking about me when we're a huge distance apart. I can know that. And that wasn't apparent in the other Homo species. It's only Homo sapiens that have had that. And with it comes like a hyper emotionalized psyche. And I mean, if we continue to evolve along this trajectory, it's almost like we're literally, what are we evolving into? What's going to come next if it keeps going along that path? In a way, it's like we're literally becoming gods.
I mean, I think I think we are. I think first of all we are gods because we are self-creating deities. We are self-creation at its finest. Like we are literally creating by prompting our environment with the things that we want to create within ourselves, we can truly create ourselves anew. And I wouldn't like to speak it as like a godhead is like above anything else. No, by interacting with everything that is unfolding before us and by relating to it as understanding what it is doing, growing, living, breathing, creating itself. I would say the concept of God for me or semi-God or demigod changed to understanding of like what is responsibility that we're having. And once you understand your own emotions, like again we go a little bit into polyvagal theory, can you comprehend that whenever you're speaking to a person who is triggered, who is maybe triggered by something they had experienced during the day, be that traffic, be that this, be that that, but that once you're facing an angry state or a fight, flight, freeze state of being, that you're not facing the essence of the person, you're facing a reaction. So then, yes, you become more aware, and that for me becomes the next state of awareness, of consciousness, of human evolution, to be able to see another person's perception, another person's understanding of the situation and the world around them, to put them in context, and to then see that putting other people in context, even within your own memories, really helps with understanding where your trauma comes from, where your own emotional regulation comes from. Maybe we were talking about it yesterday. I had an experience with my parents when I was very young, and by doing this analysis, by doing this alchemy of psychology, I could understand what the state of my mom was in a certain moment. And I was like, oh my God, I fell off my bike and there was nobody to help me and I was totally helpless. And I was like, I was so angry. But then I zoomed out of that memory and I could see my mom and her perception and her emotion regulation and her state of being within that moment. And all of a sudden, I understood what the whole aspect of that situation was. And for me, that a lot of people find that very difficult to relate to a moment and put the level of consciousness and the level of awareness and the state of the nervous system of the other people in the situation within their structure of the interpretation of the moment. And once we do that, it becomes a lot easier to be like, okay, of course she couldn't come to me right away. She was busy doing something. She was occupied, and like maybe I wasn't hurt that bad. Like all of a sudden you are able to see the situation as a whole.
I agree with a lot of what you said, but I don't agree that emotions are people at their less pure. I think that in a traumatized state, in an activated state, in a triggered state, yes, we can be reactive, but I also think that there is a purity if you're not triggered. Like, I can and am angry about the fact that there are children being kidnapped and raped. That is a pure fucking feeling. It pisses me off. I think it is heinous.
Yeah.
That, to me, the reason that we have that is to expose each of us individually what our values are. That tells me that's a value. I put value in that.
Yeah.
That is something that I stand for because that's what's in integrity for my body mind for whatever fucking reason, right? That like are pure emotions, not triggered emotions, not emotions as a result of processing trauma or a traumatic experience, but the pureness of a real emotion is to show you where your values are.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, Jung was excellent at exposing this, that you know, your sadness comes up to show you what you love. Your anger comes up to show you where your boundaries have been violated, or the boundaries of somebody else, right? Your anger comes up to give you energy to protect something. Your fear comes up to heighten your senses enough to get you out of a dangerous situation. these serve a purpose because they're valuable and they make us aligned with value.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Maybe like purity was maybe the wrong wording, but I was more like trying to create the awareness of like, okay, what if we can see when a person is in that fight, flight, freeze mode in their nervous system, because you shift from your vagus nerve.
Right.
So when you are aware of like, okay, this person is triggered right now,
and then you
so how can you
de-escalate it?
socially engage?
Yeah.
To me, that's like, okay, instead of building onto that, no, back to social engagement. How do we socially engage with a person in that state?
Right.
And for me, that's like, yeah, I didn't mean more pure and like a light being or whatever, but more as like, okay, this person is now not able to be in an actual state of social engagement. So what is my responsibility within this interaction? I'm allowed to be angry too. I'm allowed to feel all these feelings. But if this situation occurs where I'm not triggered and I feel safe, how can you then bring another person to that level of engagement again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it is the understanding. Like, I know when an emotion is coming from a reactionary place, or when it's values laden, when it's communicating something about my trajectory or where my passion is. Like, there's a distinction. There's a qualitative distinction.
Yeah.
And to me, again, it has something to do with reaction versus response. Like,
yeah, exactly.
If I can sit with something and not react to it, and my response is emotional, that's one thing. But if my immediate go-to is an emotion, that's probably because I was just triggered. That's probably not actually a values-laden communication from my body. That's probably me reflecting on something that I can't quite recall and getting triggered and getting stuck in the trauma cycle again. And again, it's nuanced, it's subtle, but
so subtle.
But it's super important to have that distinction of like emotions that are communications from something that is clear. Versus I'm gonna go like be angry out loud all the time and full anger, fight, fuck the system, fight the patriarchy, smash it all, like anger. Like this isn't emotion anymore. This is just like the feeding of the hungry ghost of trauma response.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting when you then are able to indeed go into that and be like, okay, what is this a value thing? And I mean, now I come back to that conversation I had with my friend again. I realized, hey, you have a different value or different idea of what I call friendship. And it was like, I felt so angry because it was like, I feel attacked or I feel not appreciated for the values that I have for people I call family, people I call friends. And to then be able to be like, okay, this is how I feel because of this concept that I have about family and friendships. So now I can ask you, what does friendship mean to you?
Right.
What does it mean to call somebody a sister or a brother or a family? Right. And then this anger became very useful to open up that social engagement conversation instead of just be like, I think you're stupid now because you hurt me.
Right, and it exposed the values and where your values may be different. Yeah, totally. Beautiful.
Backtracking just a little bit to what you said before about our suffering and using it for benefit, for creativity, etc., to put out into the world and give back. I feel like that kind of resonates with Buddhist ideology. So the Buddhist way is to like neutralize negative energy, negative emotions. The lamas and rinpoches, they go a step further and not only neutralize the negative energy, but turn it around to create something positive. Now, I feel like that's a very difficult thing to achieve, especially to master. Yet, I was discussing with Matthias, who was the other Wim Hof instructor, that there's been many studies done on a well-known French monk who now lives in Nepal or Tibet, and he's perhaps been put under the fMRI scanner more than any other person alive, allegedly. And what they did in a recent study with him, they showed him videos and images of people suffering tremendously, and the initial response shown by the parts of his brain that lit up in the scan was normal. It showed very negative emotions, but then that quickly turned to like a blissful, ecstatic state, like someone who was like joyful and blissful and happy. And to a normal person, that is absurd, insanity. I mean, there's this guy getting high of seeing people suffering, but no, he's through meditation and compassionate techniques, he's learned to master his emotions to then be able to turn negative energy and emotions into positive, which then benefits other people because it energizes him to help others.
Yeah.
I personally have like a qualm with the distinction between negative and positive emotions. It feels too divisive, and I know that split carried out in the psyche creates a one-sidedness that makes people worse. And I also know this from Buddhism, that like they're not talking about suffering, they're talking about aversion. It's the aversion to suffering that creates suffering, not suffering itself. Suffering is a pure thing. It's a given. It's going to happen to all of us. It already has happened to all of us the moment that you're born. That's a traumatic fucking experience. Like, you come in suffering. It's the aversion to that creates the negative cycle, and that, I will say, is negative. That is a downward spiral of deep resistance and inevitable shrinking from life, shrinking from relationships, shrinking from your own creative potential. Because the aversion to the perceived suffering of failure, of loss, of heartbreak, of all of that, it's the aversion to that perception of the inevitable suffering. There is no avoiding that suffering. It's going to happen. And as long as you're in resistance to that, you're going to create it even more, because you're going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as you live your life. You're going to die inside. But again, like, these feelings are godsends to show us where our values are, to show us to show us what's important to us. And if you don't like feeling that anger that you're feeling, fucking do something about it. Fucking change the world around you. Have the conversations that you need to have. Get the therapy that you need to get. Like, love your people harder. Do what, like, splatter paint some fucking buildings, graffiti some shit, like, throw rocks. I don't care. If you don't like feeling it, use it to make yourself feel different. That's what it's there for. It is juice for you to squeeze. And you can make the world a different place using that as your energy. That's, I mean, if you look at, like, Extinction Rebellion, for example, this woman is a fucking powerhouse of emotions, and she created an entire movement, like, fueled by her own passion for the suffering that she saw in the world. It's an amazing thing to do that, to see suffering and say, I don't want this to exist anymore. What can I do about it in my own limited me way, right?
Yeah, and I think for me that's also what you then see in Buddhist teachings. Like, what is your response? What is literally your response when you witness suffering? Do you feel like, yes, this is something I don't want to see in the world, so it motivates me to do something about it? And I think then the whole experience of the emotion becomes totally different, because when you see a suffering that you don't resonate with, or you don't relate with, or you have these emotional feelings towards, it does make you way more compassionate. It does create this like, okay, I can see the suffering in other people, and I can feel that, I can resonate with that, and it hurts my being to witness that. So within my interactions to to humans, to animals, to plants, I don't want to create that. So my actions are going to be different, and my actions, so in that sense, to me, then you let the suffering that you witness, which is inevitable and already happening and already unfolding right in front of your eyes, actually be like facing yourself and daring to create something, no matter what, that helps, or that can, at least within your circles, know that that's not a container or not a value you want to hold.
I'd really like to quickly interject. I touched previously on Buddhism. I was a little bit attached, I guess, to Buddhism for a few years, and I really resonated with many of their concepts. Yet there's one that I've kind of struggled and toyed with a bit recently, and that is letting go of attachment and not identifying with thoughts and letting them arise and pass. But then I think it was one of the ancient Greek philosophers, it might have been Plato, he said, the price we pay for indifference is that you get like assholes in positions of power.
Yeah.
So that made me kind of revise my attachment, I guess, to that specific Buddhist idea. And I think we need to be hyper aware of what thoughts we actually maintain and integrate and chase, and to empower us to act out in the world, so that these assholes, morons, or whatever you want to call them, do not get into positions of power and just cause suffering to be more widespread.
So if I understand your question, it's like if we apply non-attachment to our lives, then there's a way that we can be very dispassionate about the events of our lives, and then things like then it turns into apathy, I think, is what I hear you saying. That non-attachment is a close cousin to apathy, at least in well, it can be. My reading of that particular Buddhist teaching is less about the non-attachment to the internal experience. It's more about the non-attachment to what I do with that. So like, I can act in the world based on something that I know to be true for myself, but once it's out in the world, once I've externalized it, it's not mine anymore. It belongs to God. It belongs to the world. So that's the moment of like the thought, and of course thoughts they're not ours anyway. That's as absurd as saying, you know, that you stumble upon a raccoon in the woods and the raccoon is yours because you're walking there. No, like a thought just comes to you. So in that sense, yeah, it's not yours, so you never owned it, so let it go when it leaves. And emotions are the same. It's what you do with those things that we need to have some dispassion around. Because once I put it outside of me, it's no longer mine. It belongs to everybody that receives it. It's now theirs. And I fear that the Western attraction to Eastern philosophies like Buddhism, I fear that it's a little bit because we want a bypass. We want a nice mental construct to keep us from committing to being here. And you see it with Westerners way more than Easterners, the way that we use ideas like non-attachment and karma and dharma to bypass our emotional, visceral, related, committed, responsible experience, humiliating experience, instead of engaging with it. These days I'm very much of the opinion that Westerners should practice Western religions. That sounds racist, it's not. I just think that the psyche and the cultural milieu around the practice of a tradition or a lineage, it needs to be deeply supported. That lineages exist for a reason because they're supported on a cultural level. And when you're engaging in a lineage that your culture is not supporting, you're much more liable to misunderstand and misappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, to your point about Plato, you know, he, like, that's a very interesting philosopher to engage with. And of course, he's speaking about a lot of the same things. Like, you can do a close reading of Greek texts and Sanskrit texts and find many of the same theories represented. And there's something in the Greek philosophical tradition, in the Western philosophical tradition, that is more in the undercurrent, in the zeitgeist of our Western world. I might regret saying this in like 10 minutes, but whatever, it's what I'm saying right now.
No, but I think it's very true, and like even it reminds me of the whole idea of Ken Wilber, like the religion of tomorrow, like an integral approach to all of these. And when I look at these Buddhist teachings, that sometimes we do interpret them so wrong because of our context, and like, okay, what does actually non-attachment mean? What does it mean for you to be like, okay, I am not my thoughts, I have thoughts, or I experience thoughts, or they flow through me like a river, but that doesn't mean we become like, we have a state of apathy towards them. It's just like, we don't, like, they're not like Loops and Ableton. They just come and go and come and go, and we don't attach to experiencing the same one over and over and over and over and over and over again, because that's the emotion we experience when we're faced with this. So, like, I don't know, for me it became that interpretation of like, you let go of the idea of having to experience a certain emotion in a certain moment because that's what you do.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Now, you touched upon the vagus nerve several times, especially yesterday at a panel discussion, and it reminded me of something that someone told me whilst at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland a couple of years ago. He said that when we're stuck in thought, like the brain and the body in a way use the same hardware. Like the brain, the neural networks are responsible for so many bodily functions, as well as pure cognitive functions. So it uses the same hardware, but when we're stuck in thought, it's switched predominantly to cognitive functionality, and the body starts to lag in certain ways. Can that be explained in some way with the vagus nerve, which is, like, as far as I know, the only bi-way nerve fiber in the body that connects the mind to the body, brain to the body?
Yeah, but to be honest, I would not know the answer to that question. I don't know exactly. I just know what the vagus nerve does according to the polyvagal theory, which is like you have these two branches of the vagus nerve, one that's like responsible for both social engagement motors and freeze, so the immobilization of the body, and then the fight-flight motors, which is like the more activated part of the body. But I would not be able to answer your question regarding that. Maybe next podcast. I'll look into it.
But in a way, I mean, the ice bath was a perfect example of how that theory made perfect sense at the time. You need to get the hell out of your mind, the hell out of thought, and fully into your body. Otherwise, you're going to be suffering tremendously in that icy pool of water.
Yeah, but yeah, at the same time, for me, it still became a mental focus, because still you can create this focus on the visceral experience, on the somatic sensation, on the proprioception, on the feeling of the skin, feeling of your nerve endings, feeling of these pain perceptors, and actually really dive into that experience consciously. And then you can have a moment of like bliss or almost ecstasy within that awareness. And yeah, for me that became a very interesting part, how even within those moments of freeze, we can decide to socially engage. It's the same nerve, it's the same pathway, yet we make the differentiation between immobilization because we're safe or immobilization because we're unsafe. And once we are like, okay, I'm going through this experience, but I know I'm safe within this body, I'm safe within this mind, I'm safe within this contained moment of space-time or whatever, then even the most like extreme experience that you can have, like within an ice bath or something that feels so painful, especially when you've never done it before, it's a totally new experience, then you can still gain that conscious dialogue and that social engagement part of your nervous system to then, yeah, literally be in conversation with whatever contains everything you are.
It occurs to me, and this is kind of, I mean, I think somewhere in my mind I have the neuroscience for this, but it's like the thought loops and the thinking that there is a beneath that my phenomenological experience of thinking versus something else being perhaps is that I'm dropping beneath, and that I can even go beneath that. I can go beneath consciousness into something that is perhaps a bit more liminal, a bit more unclear, and that's a place where images arise, where imagination happens, where I can engage with archetypes or something like that. That these are kind of levels of dropping awareness down, sinking in, and that was definitely my experience in the ice bath, has been my experience of ice baths, is like, as long as I'm on the surface of my mind and in my habit, as long as my attention is on my habit of mind and I'm staying in the surface, I'm very uncomfortable. It sucks to fucking be there, but the experience is of dropping down. If I drop down to a place that is more still than that, then it's great. Then I'm there. And I mean that also makes me think of just how valuable attention is. That this is one of the most valuable tools that we possess, and resources that we possess really as humans, and when we're untrained, our attention goes to the lowest hanging fruit, which is thinking. That's the easiest place for attention to go because it's the most rapid fire. There's always something going on, and attention likes to be entertained, and that is a very entertaining thing to pay attention to, right? Like, it's going and going and going, and it is endless. So without awareness of that, that's the default. My attention goes there. Of course it does. It's the shiniest thing in the room. But the training is, and the ice bath is an amazing example of this, is to sink below that. What's underneath that? What's happening, not even in the here and now necessarily, but like, maybe it's an emotional experience. Maybe it's a physical experience, a somatic experience. There's something underneath that shiny thing happening in the mind. Always.
And I mean, you can see that a lot when people step into the ice bath. Sometimes they do get very, very emotional. And like, that's for me the most beautiful thing to see them drop down and have that emotional experience in the ice bath, and to then feel like, they're really dealing with these emotions coming up. And I experienced it myself when I started doing this ice bath. Almost every time I would go in there, like, one time I was super happy in there, one time I got really angry, and I was experiencing, kind of sifting through all these emotions that I could experience within myself at that time to kind of make sense of that inner world. And for me, the ice bath is just an amazing tool.
What you mentioned just before about hyper-focus. Now, for me, what gets me into that hyperfocal range is nature. I can like stare at insects for hours. I take macro photography images of them, and like it's an alien world. And you as a freediver, I mean, I've never done freediving, yet when I'm snorkeling, I love snorkeling, and I spot an amazing fish down below, I'll dive down and I'll go for 2 minutes without even thinking, just watching it. And just yesterday, I was walking along this path, and there was a heron just here, behind in the river, literally 5 meters that way. And I was watching it, and then suddenly a kingfisher whizzed by all the way down the river, and it went like literally skimmed past the heron just in front of its beak, and I thought maybe it was trying to steal the fish out its mouth. And to me, that was like almost like a mystical experience. I was just filled with bliss and awe, and so grateful, and it was beautiful, and yeah.
And it's the awe. It's the awe, and like I forget who said this, but the quote is, "If you're not in awe, you're not paying attention."
Yeah.
And I think that is so fucking true, because no matter what, you can zoom in on something or zoom out on something, and there is something to attend to that is shocking. It's shocking. Cells are shocking. The pattern of grass growing is shocking. Stars are shocking. Like, this shit
I was just looking at the moon.
so like preternaturally bizarre and cool, and it's so normal, and that's part of how cool it is that it's just here. It's just here, like this, doing its weird thing. And it's that attention to it that makes it so. I think that, like, again, this is our most valuable resource. If you're paying attention, there's something really fucking interesting happening, even if just for a moment. And that boredom, of course, is the disease of our culture, because our attention is so pulled from us in every direction that now we have no attention span, and so we get bored very easily. But of course, the antidote to boredom is to sit and get to focus your attention on finer and finer details until it opens up in front of you. And it does. It blooms in front of you. Everything.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, like an office job, or for me, an office job or laboratory job, which I have done for many, many years, is almost like a glorified version of being a caged animal. And boredom creeps in, and it's very difficult to apply what you just said, to be in awe in that kind of setting. Very difficult.
So do we belong in that setting? I don't know.
Perhaps unconsciously made so, right? Like,
And if you look at a caged animal, I mean, if you put a bird in a cage, not all of them, but many start to get so mind-numbingly bored, they start to peck out their feathers until they're bald over their entire body. That doesn't happen in the wild.
Of course not. Of course not. And I mean,
that's what we do.
Humans probably also didn't commit suicide in Neanderthal days, caveman days, right? Like our symptoms show that. Yeah. We're
picking our feathers.
We're not in awe. We're not in our creative potential anymore. We're picking our feathers. Yeah. Because we're caged.
I often have a debate with my older brother. I've always struggled to see the beauty in human creation. For me, nature is divine. It's like the ultimate creative masterpiece, and humans can never come close to achieving what we see in the natural realm. And to him, we are very much part of nature, and he doesn't need plants and greenery and walking in the outdoors like I do. But then there are few masterpieces for me, like Bach and certain Indian classical musicians, and, for example, a lot of Renaissance artists. But if you look at Michelangelo, for example, when he painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling, he was driven by divine calling, and we've lost our connection with the spirit and the energy required to do that kind of work.
Absolutely, we have, and I mean, there are so many monumental, insanely gorgeous, insanely intricate things that that people put. You know, it took 100 years to build some of these chapels. It took probably 300 years to build the pyramids. I totally just made that number up. I have no idea, but like, This is generations of your life that you're not going to see the end result, and you're doing it for God. That for no other reason. You're not enslaved. You're not being paid. I mean, the pyramids, maybe you were, but like...
Either that or they had some mind-blowing drugs that we don't know about.
Well, but to be honest, okay, I think when we speak about that, like, drive or that awe, I feel like we all still have it. Like, there is somebody writing a little piece of poetry, but we feel like it's not socially acceptable anymore to really devote ourselves to our craft. So it becomes this hobby. And I think that to me is sometimes the almost toxic element of society these days, that we are so focused on like creating the right environment for ourselves that these inert drives and these inert like feelings of creation, they become kind of like the margins of our life. And when we do paint or do something that really inspires us and that we get lost in for hours and hours and hours, we think it's just a hobby. And I've seen this with people that create amazing pieces and then just really like, oh yeah, but I don't have enough time because I do this and this and this. I don't have enough time to devote myself to it. So I think we do remember that we all have an essence of something that wants to come out in no matter what type of creation, but yeah, maybe feel like it's not the right thing or it's not appropriate to devote ourselves to something.
I mean, I think that's true, and I also, when it like the Sistine Chapel, for example, you know, that wasn't his life's work. That was him getting paid. Like, and interestingly, it was for God. It was to create a space for people to worship, to be reminded of majesty, to be reminded of their place in the world. I'm gonna say insignificant place in the world. By the sheer grandeur of it, like you're stunned by how small you are in comparison. Which, again, to your point about nature, that's the beauty of nature. Is like, here's a mountain, I'm so small. Here's the night sky, I'm so small. Like, it's deeply humbling. But I think in the last 50 years, the commodification of art has made it absolutely impossible to find the divine in art. I might not agree with this statement tomorrow, but like right now, I do not see people creating from a place of...
Dude!
It feels
You did
so...
it this morning when you read me that poem, and you were even like, to me, this is like...
But that's not... Yes, that was a divinely channeled thing for me in my creation. That's not going to affect more than the 7 people that fucking listen to that.
Yeah, but it's just too much information. That's the whole thing.
And that's part of this commodification, is like that because the market is so saturated with things that are like requiring our attention, it's really hard to discern what's true, beautiful, and good, and what's false, and the ones that are successful artists. I mean, Jeff Koons is the obvious example. Like, he's a fucking billionaire for making trash. It's a fucking toilet seat. It's a giant balloon animal. It's not art. There's nothing artistic in that. It's not creative. It's a replication. It's a reproduction. It's pastiche. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
And that the things that are actually unique and original, even the films that are actually unique and original, you don't see them anymore.
No.
You see movies that have a $3 billion budget that have been remade 13 times, a la Spider-Man. We don't need another fucking Spider-Man, but that's what makes money. That's what gets people.
Well, that's
paid.
the winning formula.
But ironically, the Sistine Chapel was Spider-Man. It was the Spider-Man of the times.
Yeah.
It was the winning formula. How do we get people to be so in awe that they're stunned and will come back again and again and again? Like this has always been the winning formula. It just used to be way more skillful. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have tremendous faith in technology and all things digital. I don't personally see it myself. I mean, I know programmers that are like just look at code and just have mini orgasms. To me, I've never really seen an elegant piece of code that comes close to the elegance of some of the Gothic cathedrals and Renaissance art and Baroque and classical music. And I think we're too driven by economic gain, and we're trying to do things way too fast because everything's got a deadline and everything's got to be economically viable. And until we let go of these constructs, we're not going to reach those peak creative outputs.
Yeah.
And that the creative impulse, the vision takes no time at all.
Yeah.
The vision comes in a moment.
Yes.
But sometimes that vision is a 20-year endeavor. It takes, like, it can come through in a flow state that, like, stars aligned, boom, I saw it, I saw my project, I saw my thing. If you're not willing to devote the amount of time that it takes to actualizing that, it's gonna be not good. Like,
how do you remain so consistent for 20 years?
I think this is why most people don't actually have a life's work. They don't have a piece de resistance. They don't have a masterpiece.
I think it was Oscar Wilde that said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. And that's definitely the case for me. I mean, I tend to jump from interest to interest every couple of months, and I don't know how I managed to see things through to the end in the past. I guess I just bashed them out within 3 months, because if it gets beyond that, then I tend to move on. And in this day and age, there's so many distractions and way too much information coming from too many different directions. How do we manage to just focus on one?
Attention is our most valuable resource, and it is the one that is being competed for by absolutely everything around us. And like that, like the Renaissance, they didn't have electricity. The lights went off when the sun went down.
Yeah.
Then you go to sleep. That's the only thing there is to do. You fuck or you go to sleep. Like, that's it. That's all you got.
But I think these days though, like, yes, if I look, for example, at myself, like we were talking, yes, of like the many projects, like then I'm doing this, then I'm doing that. But to me, the actual consistency of it all is to follow that drive. And to not know which story I am weaving, but to understand, like, okay, me now studying alchemy, me now studying Buddhism or mysticism, or like doing this and the other, to see that that's creating a bigger story. To not be so focused on, like, okay, now I'm doing this and this is what it's gonna be my practice for the rest of my life. I often say, like, I don't know, maybe in a year from now I will be in the mountains of India for a whole year, really diving into that, to know that that piece of knowledge, that piece of understanding, that piece of creation, that piece of creating myself will build the bigger picture as we go. And I think it's not any different for these people that created great art. And I think now we are really truly coming to a time where it truly is the art of self-creation, the art of understanding one's own psyche, that it's the only masterpiece that's kind of left to create. That's the only thing that we can create.
The life can be the masterpiece. And like, maybe it is a life of being
shifting, changing,
shifting and changing. But I mean, I will say, like, if it was easy, everybody would do it. Like, that moment of like, and I'm bored now. That maybe that's the moment of like, time to double down.
Yeah.
time to see what this boredom is about, get deeper into my investigation, get really curious about why I'm so inconsistent. Ah, right. Oh, there's the trauma around consistency.
Yes.
Oh, fuck, that feels like something.
Yeah.
That's what I've been running from. Like, there's probably an obstacle that is meaningful in the flightiness or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that comes to mind is one of the best pieces of art that I've consumed in the last lifetime is The Rose of Paracelsus that was released a couple of years ago, a book by Leonard Pickard, who was imprisoned for 2 life sentences for being an LSD chemist, LSD espionage. And in the last 20 years of being in prison, he wrote this book. It took him 20 years to write it, and it is fucking beautiful. It is stunning. Every word is fucking magic. And he had nothing else to do. He had 0 distractions. He had no internet except on privileged occasions. Everything was done via letter and like mailing out for books. And you know, it's depressing to me that it takes that level of separation or like entombment from the rest of the world to create something like that. It's depressing to think that I will never create something like that because I am in the world, because I do like relationships, because I do like distraction, because I like getting high on the weekends instead of reading books on like all of that is going to be true for probably the rest of my life. I'm never going to create something that is that masterful. I think that that's also just something that we need to accept about our reality now, that like we're never going to be as good as the vision necessarily. But if we don't try, then nothing happens. That like it's better to have a small piece of the vision actualized than nothing.
And I think we built on these visions, you know, by consuming or by understanding these pieces of art, or like by even trying to relate to what the artist was trying to convey. I mean, I really love the analogy of like, to me, everything art, be that food, be that like poetry, be that books, be that pieces of music, it's telepathy. Like somebody is trying to convey a state of their mind into something that then provokes a state of mind within you. So it's like we are looking for a vessel of telepathy. And like then to me it doesn't have to be about the masterpiece anymore, but I was like, okay, how can I put a little bit of telepathy in these chocolates that I make to bring to my workshops? How can I convey that little bit of extra love, extra awareness, extra this into something that I bring to a space? And it doesn't have to be a grand piece of art. It's that awareness of, okay, I am communicating a state of consciousness, a state of awareness to show other people like you can consume, for example, like chocolate in just a slightly different way when you melt it, which takes like literally 10 seconds, add a little bit of this oil, add a little bit of that, and it's like, whoa, it's something totally different. And to me, that is what the modern day art can be more about than creating these grand things. Some things.
It strikes me something a teacher of mine says a lot. He says the difference between walking and dancing is attitude. That's it.
Yeah.
And I think that can be true of creation of art too. That like if I'm sitting here having a conversation, I can have an attitude that this is art, that I'm creating something from some place divine inside of me, some place completely unknown. I don't know the next thought that I'm going to have, but there's an attitude of creation. Food, again, relationships, everything. The attitude of this is being created through me. I'm here for it.
Yeah. The art of being.
Yeah.
It's the art of being.
Yeah.
Maybe we should round it up now because it's getting pretty cold now.
It is.
Starting to get eaten alive by mosquitoes. Any last words?
Thank you.
Memento
Thank you
mori.
for having us. Yeah.
It was wonderful. Wonderful weekend.
Yeah,
Hope
truly.
we can do this again sometime.
Truly.
Sweet. Thank you guys.